Okay, welcome everyone to our session today. We're just waiting for some people to connect to the Zoom audio and all that stuff. We had a couple of people who were in the green room like 10 minutes early, and we were discussing beforehand how we loved that people were so eager that they showed up to a webinar early. I think that just shows how timely this topic is and how interested people are in this topic. You're in for a treat today. We're going to be talking about building sales teams, selling the vision, and building sales teams with trust at their core. Okay, I feel like we've got everyone in. Let us get started. So welcome everyone to today's Sifted Talks in partnership with Vanta. I'm going to quickly introduce our speakers and the topic, and then we're going to get right into it. Please feel free to ask questions through the Q&A function at the bottom, and I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout this conversation. And then I'll leave a couple of minutes at the end for us to turn to those questions. So feel free to just kind of drop them in there as they come to you in the conversation. So today we're joined by four amazing panelists. I'm just looking at people on my screen. We've got Oscar, who's head of outbound sales at Kovai.ceo, actually used to work in the office next to Sifted in London. So an old friend of Sifted. We've got Diana, who's chief revenue and growth officer at Sensei, Paulo, who's head of international at Vanta, and then last but not least, Julien, who is head of business at Pigment. And today we're going to be talking about building the perfect sales team for your needs. How can we win deals right now when things are tough? How can you empower your teams, motivate your teams at this time? And then also, what exactly, as it says in the title of this talk, what is trust when it comes to selling? So let's get straight into it. I thought we would kind of split up this conversation. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, split up the conversation into two parts, as the title suggests. The first is around building the teams themselves, right? And then we can go into the trust question. I know that many of our participants here will be people at early stage companies who are either thinking about hiring sales employee number one, or they'll be working with sales employee number one to build out the sales team. So let's maybe start from there, from recruitment, okay, you're a founder, you've got a great idea and a great product, and now you're like, I'm ready to build a sales team to go out and sell. Paulo, I thought you had some great thoughts on this. How do you find employee number one to build your sales team?
Yeah, I think employee number one is actually a very tricky person to find. And I think that sometimes, I'm an engineer myself, right? And sometimes we feel that sales is a bit dirty. They're like, we don't really want to do that as technical people. And we feel that there's a need for us to outsource all that to somebody else. And I think that's actually a big mistake. I think we should be looking at people that, first of all, think about the business the same way as ourselves as founders, right? People that really believe in the mission of the company, people that will actually represent you in front of the customers. Nobody can sell better than a founder. But you need to find that other person that can do a really good job. And I think that for me is critical, like finding that person that has that affinity with you, that thinks the same way that you do and sees the business the same way as you do, but actually has a lot of capabilities and skills on the sales side. And you can put in front of customers and then help you grow that team. I think that for me is a critical thing to think about. It's like, don't think about outsourcing, think about somebody that can teach you a lot about sales, that you can learn a lot from on the sales side, but really sees the world the same way as you do.
Julien, I see you have some thoughts. Jump in.
Yeah, 100% agree with Paulo. Like, the number one salesperson is definitely the founder. Like, if the founder is not able to sell, like, don't join this company. But what's key as well is, as you recruit this first salesperson, or even like the first, I would say 10 salesperson, you have to hire people who are pirates. Like, you need people who will be able to deal with ambiguity, will be okay to not have like a deal desk, to not have like a tech stack, to not have like lots of people around them to be successful. And a lot of the mistakes that we see, and I know many of you know that already, but people actually are recruiting super successful sellers coming from much bigger organizations, much more mature organizations. But the fact is, being able to replicate the exact same success in a very different setup, Very, very few people are able to do it. And so the number one question you have to ask yourself is the person who I'm about to recruit is on like a scale setup, a growth setup, or a start setup? And if you are just starting a company, go for someone who already had this experience to build from scratch. Don't have a deck, like people actually have to work on their slides themselves, right? It's like work on the messaging, like being able to answer like some tricky questions because you don't have the Q&A, you don't have the enablement, you have basically nothing but time with the founding team and the engineering team to learn a bit about the product, about what makes sense for the people we are trying to sell the product.
Yeah, I'd say the one thing I'd add is I've been the first sales hire at the last 2 companies and grown it out. And I've seen in our portfolio at my last company, there were several first sales hires who joined at similar time to me who were way more experienced that had come from 600-700 person companies. These were people initially I was like, wow, these guys these are sales kings. I'm really looking up to them. But they've been so long that they hadn't been in the trenches that they didn't really know what they were doing in a starting role, because they had to be the SDR, they had to be the AE, they had to be hiring those initial hires, and especially getting down in the trenches and doing reach out. If you haven't done it in 15 years, they probably firstly don't want to. And secondly, they just haven't had that skill set in so long. Their skill set is in managing 100 people sales team, which is a very different skill set to starting it out. So I think you getting that first person in, you want someone who's going to be also willing to get in the trenches, as Julian said. And those first hires, like whether after that SDRs and AEs, I completely agree with the pirate thing. They've got to be people who are, stuff's going to break, stuff's going to fail. They need to be entrepreneurial and happy to live in that chaos, which a lot of salespeople need the playbook and to know exactly what to do. And that stage is not for them.
Yeah, the way I see it, I guess one of the most important traits that I would hire for, and with my first salesperson, would be somebody who's really good at communication. And very often people think, oh, I need somebody who speaks a lot. And I actually think that it's more about listening and asking questions, especially in that, I mean, always, but especially in that initial kind of moment pre-Series A, when at the end of the day, what you're really trying to do from a sales perspective is to understand, your ideal client or your ideal user. And there you just need to be able to ask questions, to listen a lot, and then to relay that information and work really closely with other people within the organization who are building the product. So there, the communication skills and listening is really important from my view.
I would kind of following on this. So you find that great person, someone that's been in an early stage environment before and can really get, roll up their sleeves and do everything from making the slides. I love how you said that, Julian, to, answering tough questions, right? Then how should that person go about building their team? And I specifically would love to ask the question, like, if they have a certain budget, do you think it's better for them to hire more experience, maybe fewer, but more experienced people with that budget? Or more people, but maybe people who are not as experienced and more junior salespeople? Oscar, maybe you have as you've been building out teams like this, you have a view on this.
I think it depends in terms of the type of product you're selling. There's a lot of sales tech, there's a lot of things you can be selling that I think graduates, more junior hires can sell. At the same time, more complex enterprise type plans and those type of products, I believe you do need sellers who have seen that before. And just there's certain products where if you've never been in a tech company, it's hard to understand why that product is important. Whereas there's some where it's really super easy to see immediately for anyone that they can sell it. So I think that depends on the complexity of your product, because sometimes you can overkill it. Sometimes you just don't need really experienced people. You can have great grads who are really keen, really hungry. And if you can teach them well, that's what I did at my last one. At this one, I'm kind of going potentially already, we might need the products a lot more complex and may need some people with that experience. So I think it depends, but that's how I'd look at it. It's all about the complexity of your product and the complexity of your sale.
Super interesting. Anyone want to kind of piggyback on that?
I'll add something that I think it's also relevant on top of what Oscar just said, right? It's about the product, but it's also about the people that you sell to, right? It's not the same selling to a business owner or to a head of a department or to a head of IT. And I think when you're looking at your first hire and scaling up that team, you need to understand if they have had that experience selling to that persona. So like in my experience, for example, when we were building the sales team at Dropbox, we were selling to IT. So we were looking for people that would actually be comfortable selling to IT. Whereas, for example, right now in Vanta, mainly our main buyer tends to be the founder, technical co-founder of a company. So it's more about, okay, can you engage with that profile? And then you make that decision. It's like, do I need to go for somebody that really knows how to do this and has years of experience? Because it's a very complicated sale and it's a very complicated persona to engage with. Like, for example, CIO of a large multinational. Okay, you probably want somebody with experience, but co-founder of a technical startup, good. Anybody that has been in that environment can probably come in and do a really good job, right? If you train them well.
There is a matrix I'm using. It's a very simple one, like the 3 C's. So basically, I'm looking at character, competencies, and commitment. And as you grow as an organization, like, of course, the weighting you're going to have for each of those pillars will change. Like, first, you have to optimize for commitment and character. Like that, as simple, because it's going to be hard. Like, you're going to have lots of rejections, and it's going to be really tough. And as you grow and you start actually to have like a better process, tools, support, setup basically for the team, you will go like even more for competencies because, well, you want to play on their strengths. But yeah, I cannot agree more with Oscar and on this. And Paolo, it's really about like ask yourself like the type of people you are selling to, the complexity of your selling process. Because yes, I mean, you're gonna have to raise the bar in terms of competency because, well, those things at some point you can't just like try, like you have to have done it before.
Dan, I see you have something to say, but I'm going to just pop a little question that's come up in, and maybe you can answer this while saying what you want to say. Someone's asking in the chat, how do you value and prioritize experience of selling to the same sector, i.e. vertical SaaS, in that first or second sales hire? I thought that's super relevant, so I'm going to pop that in the conversation too.
I think that obviously it's one of the factors to take into account, but I would really hire more for commitment and flexibility, as like in line with what Julian was saying, because at the beginning it really is about finding, that it's not about. I think one of the mistakes that founders often do is say, I've got this amazing product, and I want to sell it to everybody. So I want, I want to hire a first person who ideally has already sold to whatever, like if it's SaaS or in a specific industry, but I want to sell to everybody in that industry. And that is the wrong approach because you need to find your niche. It's all about finding your niche. And then when you're, I'd say there's like 3 steps. The first one is, understanding and creating a client base. So that's where you want to go to the niche. Then it's about creating repeatable and predictable revenue growth, right? That's phase 2. And then phase 3 would be, expanding your offering and expanding your client base. And sometimes people forget that there are these 3, that no matter what sales process, no matter what industry, there are these 3, let's not reinvent the wheel. There are these 3 different stages, and, you don't want to rush them. You really want to, change phase when it's the right time, not go straight to the 3rd phase.
Yeah. And on building this team, kind of just to follow on this theme, I wanted to ask for your thoughts as well on compensation for salespeople. So I know, it can be a very pricey hire. How have you all seen that kind of change, like this year, for example, versus what might have been happening when we were really in this tech boom? And how can you be disciplined but fair and incentivize people at the same time on compensation? Diana.
So honestly, I haven't really seen, and maybe, you guys have, it would be interesting to see from other people here as well, their views, but I haven't seen salaries for tech, for sales, for people in sales teams of tech startups go down. I think so far it's been more about, kind of on the other hand, a salesperson, they pay for themselves, I think it's more around getting the compensation structure right, ensuring that there's a variable. But at the same time, when you're measuring, it's not only, a lot of people tend to focus on, number of sales closed, to kind of focus on the outputs. But I do think that it's very important, especially at the beginning, also to look at the inputs and to measure the inputs. So balancing that out. And then in terms of compensation, I'm very much for, uncapped, having an uncapped variable. The more they sell, the better. But there are other views here probably.
Yeah, I think the one thing I'd say is that definitely early on in the first year, you've got to be very flexible because you don't know what the target should be yet. It hasn't been done, you just don't know. And salespeople, you can easily set it too high and just annoy people who are doing good work, or set it too low and you lose a lot of money. And I think therefore the flexibility for those first few hires is important, and being transparent with that, because if you set a target and change it in 2 months' time without them having any idea, they could get annoyed. But if, like, I feel what some of the founders for me were very good with going to be very flexible early on, and we work together almost on that, because otherwise I think you can, until you've got the predictability down, I think you've got to be careful with it with the first hire, just not to make those mistakes, because salespeople who don't hit target consistently leave typically, to be blunt, and therefore you've got to be good with that.
I think there's another topic
Dan.
as well that I wanted to just make sure we don't forget here, which is that individual targets versus team targets. And I believe that even at the beginning, where you don't have that predictability and it's all about expanding and finding and expanding that client base, you want to have a variable, but maybe that variable doesn't need to be an individual variable, but more of a team variable, just to promote that information exchange and that communication, which I think is really, really important, especially at the beginning of your journey as a startup.
Julia, I saw you had something to say on this too.
Oh, I know. Diana already said it. Like, it's as you said, like, super important to think about like team quotas. Fully agree with you, Oscar, as well. Like, things are moving so fast. Like, you don't necessarily have to give like annual targets, right? You can give like half-year targets, and then like you can change, adapt, based on what you learn about your own product. Think about it as well. Like, your pricing going to change a lot. So for pricing will impact sales will impact a comp. So this thing is also very very important to keep in mind. When I was at Meta, Facebook, it took us like probably like 2.5 years, 3 years before actually like landing the sales comp for people. There is also one good thing when people have like a team quota, is like they think as a team. And so when you start as a business, you want your salespeople to not just be salespeople. You want them to be your eyes and your ears in the market, being able to collaborate with your product marketing team, your engineering team, bring all the intel to the HQ in order for the HQ to maybe change like the messaging, maybe change materials, or even the roadmap. And so because you ask them a bit more, like we have of course, like to make it to be even more responsible when it comes to the comp.
Yeah,
I want to go ahead.
Eleanor, can I just connect a couple of thoughts that I think were honestly mind-blowing from this group? Like one of the things that Julian said, it was around the commitment when you make those first hires. And one of the things that Diana mentioned was like those 3 phases of a company, where you're finding your product market fit, when you're building predictable revenue, and when you have more products to sell, right? So if we bring it back to compensation, I think if you start connecting those dots, then it all makes a lot of sense, right? When you're starting to hire for those people that they're looking for product market fit, they're really committed, probably you should be a bit more flexible on the compensation side, probably more towards shares than cash, because you're actually contributing to the long-term growth of the company, rather than, hey, just now we know how to do it, let's build a factory here, where that's where probably you want to have a slightly different compensation model. And I think that's where founders should be looking at their company and say, hey, where are we at, right? Do we already have product market fit? Do we need to start scaling this up? And I think that's kind of what dictates your compensation structure.
I love that, for sure, for sure. I thought another really interesting thing that came up when we were talking about this idea of building the sales team yesterday, and I thought it was interesting how many of you seemed very passionate about this, was should you require people to be in the office when you have a very early sales team, right? Obviously, there's a lot that can be learned and shared. Julien, you talked about this, motivating everyone as a team, right? And it's easier to coordinate sometimes when everyone is in the same space. How have you all approached that question of remote versus hybrid versus in the office?
Office is better.
Office is better. Oscar is office. I love it.
No, I think you can. I've seen there are obviously lots of examples of really successful remote sales teams run. I just think you need to have, for startups, probably a bit like the organizational infrastructure and tooling. You probably need to do that effectively. I would say it's tougher. In person, especially for sales teams, just the knowledge sharing is just, you cannot match it online. There's so much that just gets learned from little conversations. AE comes off a call and says a few things that an SDR picks up on. You just can't recreate those interactions. And I think for kind of morale and kind of feeling the wins together, it's harder to do that when you're in your bedroom, right? So obviously there are really good examples, and some of the other guys may have different experience with that, but I do feel it's easier to create in person. And salespeople, I think, more than most other roles, want to be in the office. A lot of other roles would rather be from home. They find it, but a lot of salespeople want that camaraderie and want to be together.
Yeah.
Curious to hear from the others on that.
I echo that. Personally, I prefer office. That's just the way I feel it, like very people-oriented person. But I think there's, like everything, there's different flavors that you can take. For example, Vanta is a very distributed company. However, when we started our operations in Europe and in APAC, we actually decided for in-office, at least for the first year. And our rationale behind that is exactly what Oscar said. Like, how do you build a team? Like, you need to build that camaraderie, that knowledge sharing. Can you do that in a remote environment? Absolutely, yes, you can. But you need to put much more effort towards it. So our conundrum was like, where do we want to put our limited amount of time and effort? Do we want to put it in a distributed environment, or do we want to put it in different areas? So the decision was, let's do this for a year. Let's make sure that we build the right culture, that we hire the right people, we put them all in the same place, and then let's reevaluate at the end of that year if this is still the right setup, or do we have the basis to continue the expansion, probably through a more distributed architecture. And that was kind of like the call that we made.
That's interesting. Diana.
No, I have to agree with what both Oscar and Paolo have said. But I think there is a point that we also need to take into account, which is that given the fact that, for about 2 years, people have been working remotely, it is really, really difficult to find top talent in tech. Maybe now with the layoffs, it might be a little bit easier. I don't know. Let's see. But I think it's very difficult to find top talent in tech who actually want 100% to be in 100% in an office environment. So whilst, it is the ideal from a founder's point of view, right? And much easier. I think that if we're building for scale, you probably want to keep, for at least have a 6 to 12 months in office, but then you do need to go kind of hybrid quite quickly, because otherwise you're just closing the doors to, to just so much talent that's out there, and who would otherwise, probably not even speak to you. And so there, I think that the role of the managers and like being like real managers and having people skills and the tools that I think Oscar mentioned as well become really important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's interesting, both, you, Paolo, and also Diana, you talked about tools as well, right? Because if you are, even just a hybrid team, you do need those tools for communication. And so I wanted to ask, kind of as a final thing on this building the team, is how important is that tech stack, and how much should you invest in the tech stack for your sales team at the beginning of a startup journey when maybe you don't have so much budget? What's your view? Maybe Oscar, you have something on this.
Yeah. So I think with the tech stack, the thing is with a lot of sales tech that you can have a pretty reasonable tech stack now for not too much budget. Like your basic, your outreach tools, your data tools. There's some good ones out there where you can do quite a lot. Because that's literally going through that process at the moment of picking the tech stack, and it's the only issue when you can't pay as much. Sometimes you can't integrate it quite how you want. But I think there's almost, I think now there's a certain level of tech stack you have to realistically do outbound, but most of those outreach sales type tools, there are now great equivalents that can do largely the same, that are out in the market that anyone here, any early stage founders can access one seat for, $60 a month type plans that are there. That and a data tool you can do a lot with. Obviously my big thing is the best hire as soon as you can afford one is sales operations, and you get a bit bigger. I love sales operations because they do what I'm not very good at and organize that stuff. I make a mess and they come in and sort it all out. But I do think as from as early as possible, trying to think about the future of where you're going with the tech stack is important. So you don't, especially with the CRM and data, so you don't get caught out, I think important. But I do think now there's a very affordable level of tech stack that any founder can have and would be happy to share what I think that should be.
Julian, do you have a view on this one?
Yeah, one thing I highly recommend as early as possible is actually to record calls you have with anyone, like prospect customers, roadmap sessions, or even just basic pitch, because all this knowledge you're going to capture then can be reused internally, not just to the salespeople, but to the engineering team and product team to actually be in the room with you, even if, of course, they are not there. So you can do it in a very cheap way, like all the VC solutions, for that. You have a couple of more sophisticated solutions in market, but it's been, I don't know, close to 6 years now I'm using that. That's been a game changer for enablement, game changer just to be able to improve our pitch and the way we were doing things, and also to try to bring consistency in how we were doing things. And so this one, I think, is a big one. Of course, on my side, you wouldn't be surprised, but I think relatively quickly, definitely not before you hit 50 salespeople or plus, you have to look at planning solutions. You need to make sure to hire at the right time, the right people. And for that, you need tools that will help you to define territories, quotas, sales capacity, and all those things. And I've seen it. Diana, you mentioned it, but we have seen a lot of horror stories in the last couple of quarters now of companies hiring way too much, way too fast, and unfortunately have to make very, very hard decisions for their teams and ecosystems. And so if you are able to plan in advance, you actually are able to make informed decisions. It doesn't mean that you're going to make the right decisions, but at least you will know what may happen if things change. So that one as well. And we see kind of a big awakenings around RevOps people who will be actually very, very keen to partner even more with the finance teams in order to build the right plans, or the different plans that may happen for the future of the company.
There's a couple questions on specific tools. Julian, someone was asking, do you have any recommendations for those kinds of planning tools that help?
For planning tools, I recommend Pigment, but for the others, I'm a big advocate of Gong. I'm using Gong and for years and years and years and years to keep getting better. I also highly recommend, in terms of tool for the company, a great task management solution. So we're using ClickUp everywhere at Pigment, for every single process, and we love it. And great companies, they innovate a lot. So it's also something that if you can actually get your sales team to create tasks when they see something wrong, when they see something broken, when they have a request, you're going to move way faster than your competitors. Because today, most of the sales people, what they do, they just complain. They complain on Slack, they complain on email, they complain on calls, but you don't capture the information. you don't turn unstructured information into structured information so people actually can take ownership of it and ship something to help them. So if you move the mindset, like stop complaining, like just fill a task, and then of course, like you have to take care of those tasks. But this is also something that was kind of pretty life-changing when I was at Facebook and now at Pigment.
Diana, Paulo, any tools that you love and are obsessed with? Can't do without.
I think more than tools, it's about consistency in using the tools, and that's why it's come up a couple of times during the conversation. But having somebody who's looking after RevOps, and it sounds a bit harsh, but like policing everybody into filling in and using the tools. And we're kind of going back to management, but I think a couple of things that have come up during the conversation are around, we want to measure everything, right? Or we want to track and measure everything. That's the ultimate goal. Now, the thing with tracking and measuring is that especially at the beginning, I mean, always, like there's always like a lot of stress in tech startups, but especially at the beginning where you're kind of finding your way, you want to make sure that you're communicating with your team the reasons why you are asking them to do this, because it can quickly be misinterpreted. And this is also why company culture is so relevant. It can quickly be misinterpreted into, oh, they want to see if I'm good or not. And that is not the objective. I mean, obviously, there's a part of that that's important that, that you're also looking at. But the objective of having these tools is at that point, not so much about measuring the people, but understanding, again, like going back to creating that repeatable and predictable revenue growth. It's understanding what are the pain points, just as Julian was saying, right? Understanding what needs to be changed from a product perspective, from a sales perspective, etc. And you can't do it unless you have that data logged somewhere. It's it doesn't mean that you're not trusting your team. It just means that this is unfortunately a really boring thing, or what most people see as a really boring thing that has to be done in order to improve and bring the company forward.
Yeah, totally. I think that also, interestingly, that sense of communication as well links to an interesting question that has come up in the Q&A thing is, would you do a sale at any cost, even if it means developing new functionality to meet a client need? Which kind of comes back to this why that we were talking about. Paulo, you want to take that one?
Yes. I spent too many years doing pre-sales not to answer that one. I think it really boils down to what stage are you in as a company? Are you trying to find product market fit? Are you in a scaling, right? If you're trying to find product market fit, probably it's a yes, right? You're exploring, your customer is telling you that they're willing to pay for something. I'm like, maybe I'm building the wrong thing, right? Let's go and explore that. When you're in a much more clear trajectory, then it's really around, would I have built this anyway? Like, that's the question I always ask myself. It's like, at any point, is this going to be built by the product team or not? Yes, it will, because the direction of the product is taking us there. Cool. Go make the sale. You're going to build it anyway. You may as well get some money for it, right? If the answer is no, don't do it, right? Because then sometimes we only think, I mean, in sales, we're coin-operated people, right? Like we go in, we sell, we get paid for that, right? So even though this is potentially short-term gain, long-term, it's horrible, right? Because you're going to put a CSM into that account. They're going to get grilled. Engineering is going to have to go and build that. You're pulling so many resources from the company. And if you're at the run of scale, you could actually sink the whole place just with that feature. Right. So we need to be very thoughtful and very careful on the reason why we decide to go and build that. Right. And that's the criteria I would use.
That's a great answer. So I want to kind of move, we're like a little over halfway through the conversation. But I want to move to kind of the second part of the talk, which is around trust, right? And so very big question, but what does trust look like? What does building the trust with the customer look like? Is that having a great salesperson? Is that having great, product reviews? Is that partnerships with brands? How have you all approached this question of trust? Maybe Julian, we can start with you.
So on trust, I mean, in general, trust, and sorry to come back on frameworks, but basically it's about reliability, skills, and purpose. Like once you have like those three, usually like on green lights, like you can trust actually the person in front of you, especially at work. When it comes to selling to companies, especially since the rise of the cloud, trust is even more important. Like the data is not sitting, in your office. Like you don't even have a control, on the machines supporting those apps and this data. So the level of trust has to be at, the highest level. On top of that, of course, like even when you go like for most of the software solutions now, they themselves rely on many other tools to actually make their own solution work. So it's not just about like, hey, I'm going to buy something from this vendor. I'm actually buying something from like maybe 15, 20, 30 different vendors. And so the trust element is absolutely key. One of the key questions that we have, and we are selling to CFOs, we are selling to CROs, relatively large companies like the likes of course, the Figma and the Carta and much bigger companies as well. I think trust in tech often comes back to security, and security is absolutely critical. And for that, on my side, I'm always using this kind of approach, which is about the facts. Like you bring like certification, and we have one player here helping a lot, into that. So like the certification, absolutely critical, because those are standards and they do help you to move super fast into the RFP and just to get a stamp, like the ISO, the SOC 2, and all the others. The second one is really about your, in a way, track record and the companies you already have been able to sell to. And like if you get a first yes from a bank, I mean, I can tell you that the second bank, it will be easier to get it. It works as very easy this way. And the last one is really about like being able to be as transparent as possible. Like if you have a page, like articulating your security story, being able maybe to have like beyond this trust center, like having a bug bounty program, which like you ask people to hack your solutions. And also to be in a position to be able to publish, the findings of those audits or acts, that have been done. Like those are the things, at least from a security point of view. I know we want to talk about a broader topic, but that definitely helps to create a trusted relationship with the prospect.
I love that. Super concrete. Really awesome. Who wants to jump in next? Diana.
I think Julian's touched on all the points that I also find important. At the end of the day, you also need to think what kind of what kind of sales model you have. So I think Julian, from what he was saying, is more focused on enterprise sales. In my case, in Sensei, it's the same, right? We're selling to the largest retailers in the world. We have a solution which is a little bit scary for retailers, right? Because we do have, we're using AI and computer vision. So we need to be very, very clear about, how we are using the data, which data we're using, that we're not taking any biometric data, etc. And that's where, obviously as a first point, there's the honesty in salesperson that's important, right? That person that's talking to you is conveying, that transparency. And sometimes it's important for salespeople, at least in our company, that that they understand the product very well. But very often you're talking to technical teams who obviously know their domain much better than you do. So there you just need to again be honest and say, look, let me come back to you on that. And then having the audits and the certifications, at least in our case, is also key, because at some point, I mean, yes, you have the trust, but you do need to be able to certify it or verify it, and therefore, and there are great solutions out there. I think Paolo should talk a little bit about his, but clearly key. in a cyber connected world.
Yeah. I mean, easy for me to talk about it because like that's what we do at Vanta, right? So it's really about helping people get compliance ready. I think there's one thing that that I would actually add before, which is this has changed pretty dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years, and I think that we should take that into account. And how has this evolved, right? Beforehand, nobody would ask you for an ISO 27001 unless it was like this massive enterprise buyer. Right now, everybody's asking for it, and it's all about what Julian mentioned. Like, is this network of vendors that are deeply interconnected? So anybody in that network could be the weakest link, and you're trying to make sure that everybody is vetted in some way. And for me, the time that I realized this was before I joined Vanta, and I was already in talks with Vanta. I was advising a smaller startup, seed startup in Spain, and they were going up market. They were trying to win bigger customers. One of those bigger customers, which was a Series B company, came back to them and was like, "We love your solution. If you don't have a SOC 2, we're not going to buy from you." And then they just got and bought Vanta right away. I was like, whoa, hold on a second. This didn't happen 6 years ago. And there's this shift in the market where trust is now a much higher currency than it was before. And demonstrating that trust is actually much more important than what it was before. And you need to be much more transparent, much more upfront with it. Whereas before, it would almost be an afterthought. It's like, yeah, we'll see the solution, and then at the end, we'll do the checkbox on trust and security, and you'll be fine. Right? So I think that's some very interesting shift in the market that, for me, was kind of like the reason why I decided that, okay, maybe Vanta is the right place for me, because like there's a market for it.
The only two quick things I'd add is also on top of what Paolo said is do it earlier than you think, because SOC 2 and ISO take time. Like, so you don't want to start losing deals because you don't have them. And then like probably in that example Paolo gave, it then took them the time to do it. So do it early, get the certifications, because it's the most annoying way to lose a deal. No one likes it because you don't have that. And the other one, based on what Julian said, is I think case studies should be like a priority for marketing and success constantly. Just constantly be getting more and more case studies from customers, especially if you're early stage startup, don't have many customers, get all of them. All of that stuff really helps you early on, and then they can be deployed in, you know, if you've got a French company, that can be deployed when you're talking to these French ones, and they can, the more you have, the more options you have to utilize it. So like get loads of case studies for you, very as possible for your ICP.
And so kind of moving to, yeah, I feel like you guys like really covered a lot on this topic, moving towards kind of the now and what's happening in the market now to round out the conversation. Obviously, it's tough times in tech right now. You know, Julian, you touched on before, some companies that really scaled up a lot in recent years have had to pare back. How should sales teams be approaching winning deals when you're in a downturn? And yeah, how should you think about doing that? Who wants to go first? Diana.
Yeah, again, it depends on the market that you're in, right? In our case, again, you know, enterprise sales model, you know, we're after really large clients, and therefore for us, it's about building a relationship. And when you build a relationship, you know, in our case, like there aren't that many top retailers in each country, so it's worth really going into it with the mindset where you're saying, okay, we are building a relationship. And then of course, like if you are, and this is where the quality versus quantity, right, of your sales team, I think is quite important, where you go into, you know, each conversation needs to be about, you know, listening and understanding what are your clients' pain points. So I think right now, at least in our case, it's even more important to do the basics right, to get those basics right, and not just to have, you know, automated machines who are just, you know, talking away. I think we've all been on the other side of the table as well. And so, you know, any approach has to be a high value approach. and it needs to be well planned and well executed.
Julia, I see you nodding a lot over there.
Yeah, I mean, Diana, I cannot agree more with what you said. I don't know if maybe the audience, people in the audience read that book, which is The Qualified Sales Leader. If not, I really invite you to read that one. And there is something around, like, of course, at the beginning of the qualification, it's price justification. Lots of people think that price conversations will happen at the end, like contracting stage. It's way too late. It's way too late. Like, you have to be able to quantify as early and in a super detailed way as possible the pain, like the pain that they have today. Like, how many meetings do they have? How much time does it take? How much risk do they take? How much value do they lose? It's always about those things, right? The risk, the value and the cost. Like, so at the end of the day, like, you have those 3 boxes. You just need to be able to quantify the impact of the product you are about to sell in this very specific organization. And so probably, like, definitely more than yesterday, like, you have to fight for the value. And so it means that you have to extract, like, from the people you are talking to, like, what will this solution will do in the organization. And so when the money was free, I mean, we are selling to tech, like, a couple of years ago, it was free. Money was free almost, right? So people were keen to spend, like, 100K here, 200K there. Now those days are gone. So you have to go back to basics, as you said, Diana, which is really about, like, be amazingly good, in just like the execution and the focus on value qualification. And again, anchor on price early, because, well, the last thing that you want today is actually to waste your time on accounts that at the end won't pay, like, the right amount for your solution. So it means that, again, like, this is going to be key to qualify super early on.
The only things I'd add from probably 2 points. One is on directly from an outbound perspective is adapting the messaging and the framing. Some of what Diana said, I think, could be done from the wording straight out the gate. So, for example, the same tool when we had to change it at my last company was from, you're growing quickly, get this under control, so you can grow quicker, to you need to be more efficient and scale efficiently and sustainably. Same solution, just framed differently. And I think that messaging, and that made a huge amount of difference, just that switch. Just frame the messaging and really think about how you can frame it in the current context. The second tip would be don't obsess over it, because it can get too much into the sales team. Oh, it's difficult out there, it's tough environment, tough world. I don't think you want them aware, and so they can change the messaging. As Diana said, listen to really what the customer is saying at the moment. But also, I think you want to be careful as a leader not to, like, get obsessed about, oh, it's hard and it's difficult, because that can seep into salespeople's mindsets, which I don't think is a great thing. So you still want to be positive about, look at the opportunities of what this produces and how we can switch the messaging, and how now actually this kind of argument is particularly powerful in this context. That's easier for some companies than others, but I think always there is an angle, and being positive, I think, is important, and not getting overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. And I think that links to, and I'm going to come to you, Paulo, that links to what I wanted to ask next, which is, like, how can you keep teams motivated, right, when times are tough? And I love that message about positivity. Don't, if people are thinking negatively, then that's, no one's going to be motivated. Paulo?
Motivation is super important in these times, right? Like, we need to keep our teams engaged, because, as Oscar said, like, it can creep in and you're like, oh, times are tough, and then it snowballs and you can't get out of it. For me, it's really about keeping the team engaged in what they're doing, right? Not just their sales target, but, like, they are part of a company that we're trying to achieve something big, and involve them in that plan from the get-go, right? So one of the things, for example, we've been doing with the team in Europe is working with them in building our strategy for this year, for 2023. And we started 4 months ago, and they've been participating in all that. And for me, that's the key. Like, they're part of the plan. They're actually building it with us. And it's not just, oh, I'm here just to do my numbers and off we go. It's, no, I actually contributed to building this. Part of my ideas are in this plan. I want to give it my heart and soul. And comes back to that commitment that Julian was talking about in the beginning. It's like, if you hire committed people that are putting it all in that startup, then you're going to get more out of it than just their sales numbers, right? And for me, that's the key. Just get people involved, get them to understand the why, not just the what they are doing, and that will come back to you tenfold.
Anyone else on the motivation question? Diana?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. There's, especially in times that are difficult, transparency is really important, and transparency goes two ways. Because like you want your teams to be, feeding into you and to the rest of the teams, like what's working, what's not working, how is the customer changing, what are the new pain points, or how are the pain points shifting. And sometimes as founders, we kind of, shield our team a lot, and we feel that, oh my God, if I tell them, that the pipeline is shrinking, or I'm starting to see bad numbers, if I share that information with the team, they're just going to panic. And what I've seen from experience is precisely the opposite. It's normally, especially with sales teams who are close to the client, like they tend to kind of have a feeling about what's going on. And sometimes, going back to what Oscar was saying before, sometimes you get into this spiral where they start thinking, oh my God, like the world's ending, or things are shit, or I'm hearing, Facebook or whoever is just, fired like a ton of people, 15% or of their workforce. So you want to be as transparent as possible with your team so that they understand like what's happening, the good and the bad, and give them a chance of really being part of, of being part of the purpose and being part of the journey of the company, that engagement. But it's a two-way street.
Totally. Yeah, Julien.
Yeah, what probably your salespeople want to know more than anything else is that you have the same understanding of the world than they do. Like there is nothing worse than actually like people in the front line, like feeling that the world is collapsing, and having like the executive team saying like, everything is okay, like let's keep pushing, guys, like 500% growth. People are like, what? Like, then you start to see this disconnect. And so you always need to have like the shortest distance between the people in the front line and the management, so they can take actions like very quickly. Because at the end of the day, like the sales team, I mean, there is the news, right? Like Diana said, like the Facebook and many others, unfortunately. And so people are impacted by this. So they are not blind. They talk to their customers, they look at the news. And so what they would like for sure is like when they look at leadership to acknowledge the situation, but also to tell them that we're working on a plan. Here is a plan. How can you contribute to the plan? Because you're going to be part of the answer as well. And really like to work as one in this case is even more important. Culture, we say culture is built like during good times, but culture is definitely tested during tough times. So that's why it's absolutely key to make sure that people feel that they are in this together.
I think the thing I'd add there is I speak to quite a lot of founders. Some founders have readjusted their own targets, but then don't adjust their teams because they go, oh, well, just keep pushing the team then. We've readjusted ours, but like they don't need to know that. But that doesn't make sense, because if you're saying overall it's harder, then you should, you obviously always want to be careful as a sales leader and a founder to readjust team targets, SDR, targets, but sometimes small amounts can make a big difference to morale, because the difference between 70% of people being on target or 70% of people being off target has an effect on the team. Because if you suddenly have a situation where with one founder I spoke to, they went from 80-20% swing. Like if 80% of your team aren't hitting targets, an unhappy team, and they only needed to change their numbers slightly to make that happen. So I do think being aligned there, it's never a good thing overall, I think, to change targets, but you need to have that flexibility sometimes to make sure it's right for the team and make sure it's right for what you're trying to do.
Amazing. So we have about 6 minutes left. So I want to just jump to some questions that are in the Q&A box. And I'll just have kind of maybe one of you answer each question. There was one for you specifically, Paolo. Someone's asking for a recommendation on the basic sales team structure for a B2C based startup company. And should we have a pre-sales before leading towards the actual sales? That's a question.
So I'm gonna lean on my Dropbox experience for this one. I think on a B2C side, you probably want to keep it very simple and very tight, right? You want the product to do as much as the work as you can get the product to do. So you're looking at product-led growth and potentially some type of sales-assisted mechanism that tends to work really effectively. So when you get people engaged with the product and they drop or they find gaps, then get a human to support them and engage with them. I don't see a lot of pre-sales on B2C because you're trying to appeal to consumers. It tends to be like pretty simple, pretty straightforward sales engagement. So like I probably wouldn't go that as far as having a technical pre-sales team to go and support that. Normally, like you would have just a single salesperson assisting where people fall off the funnel. And that's actually a very good use of human time.
Nice. Next question was, have you ever seen a startup succeeding with just first a few sales hires instead of founder-led sales in the early days? In other words, should at least one of the founders be very hands-on in selling at least from the beginning? Diana, I feel like you talked about a lot about this from yesterday when we had our
I haven't really seen a lot of examples in which early stage startups are able to succeed without at least one of the founders being very involved in sales. And it's not just because, remember that sales, like we can't look at sales as a vacuum, especially in the early stages. Like sales is, one of the many parts, but a key part in your, in your product. You can't separate product from sales in the way that you need to be listening to the market to be able to tweak your product or to completely pivot. Like that's also decisions that you need to be making, right? So it's very difficult from somebody who's hired from the outside and who, in a very small team and who doesn't have the authority of a founder to be able to really be able to change or to shift or to prioritize. Remember that we're talking about early stage startups here who are always at 150% capacity. So it's very, very difficult for somebody to do that who is not a founder. Plus, like, think of all the good information that you're getting and knowledge of the business to then be able to help you with your funding conversations.
Oscar, I see you want to jump in.
For example, I as someone who has joined early twice, I wouldn't join if the founder hadn't already made some sales and knew how to sell their own product, because they, as Diana said, they need to know that I then come in to take all that information and build that out, but they need to have that foundation. And also I do think for the first 6 months, they almost should spend no less, and for maybe longer times after that, no less time doing sales. I need to absorb everything they know and have their view on the market. Like founders will have an exceptionally deep knowledge of the market that's almost hard to ever get up to a point. And therefore they just always need to be involved. It's not about, kind of not doing it without them. I think I wouldn't join a startup that was trying to do that.
I will be slightly controversial here. I think like the profiles of founders may be very different, and you have like 3 engineers who definitely could inspire the audience the same way as they're going to inspire the investors. They're going to inspire the first people to join the company, but they're not closers. Like they don't know how to negotiate things. They don't really know about contracts. They have never done this before. So sometimes, especially when you go like for something like upmarket, relatively enterprise, it may be more complicated for them. And then like if they are lucky enough to have as part of their first couple of people joining the company, someone who can actually assist them into that, I think it's still kind of okay. But at the end of the day, the role of a founder is always to sell. Like you sell actually to poach, the best talent. You sell to get the money from investors. You have to sell, to the journalist in order to get like this nice paper on this newspaper. Like your job is to sell every day your pitch, like till people are sick of it. Like so, the only thing is like sales is way more complex and broader than that. So I think it's really about more the inspiring part and being able to listen as well to the signals from the market and really like being a closer.
Amazing. Wow. That's such perfect timing because we've got 1 minute left. So I'm going to close it out here. I feel like we could keep talking for like another hour probably. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining today. This was great. I feel like I learned a lot, and I hope that all of our participants also learned. Thank you so much to our partner Vanta for your support. And we've got one more Sifted Talks on March 1st about data stuff. So if you enjoyed this talk, please join us for the next one. And thank you again, panelists. Really enjoyed the conversation today. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.